Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a genuine novelty. Toccata Classics, a fabulously adventurous label, is undertaking a series of the complete orchestral works of Moritz Moszkowski. And here is Volume 1, containing a work that nobody will know, his Joan of Arc Symphony. Yes, Joan d'Arc, the Joan, the Arc, that's the one. Really kind of amazing. This piece, which was composed in, I guess, around 1877, it seems, according to the notes, this piece follows in an illustrious line of sort of mid-19th century programmatic symphonies. And we know what they are, at least the more famous ones. Things like Liszt's Faust Symphony, Berlioz's Harold in Italy, Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony, Rimsky-Korsakov's Antar. There's a whole passel of them, but the ones that are perhaps most relevant for our consideration here are Raff's Leonora, his Symphony Number 5, and also Reinberger's First Symphony, the Wallenstein Symphony, which of course is also based on a play by Schiller, as is this, because Joan of Arc's real-life situation is not the story which is told, particularly anyway, in this symphony. Moszkowski took as his source Schiller's play, The Maid of Orleans, Die Jungfrau von Orleans, or whatever it's called, which also served as an opera by Tchaikovsky and an opera by Verdi. And, Schiller was all over the place in those days. And so this is a genuine symphony. It was also dubbed a symphonic poem, as with Rimsky-Korsakov and so many other composers. Sibelius later in his Lemminkainen legends. People weren't quite sure whether to call these things symphonies or symphonic poems, because the symphony itself consists of four independent sort of symphonic poems, although these were never performed separately and really can't be. They have to be played together. The piece takes about an hour. It is not one of those horribly inhibited, dreary German works, as, for example, is Reinberger's Wallenstein Symphony, which is boring beyond belief. But this particular piece, is relatively uninhibited. The scoring calls for a generous passel of percussion. It has a harp, it has piccolo, it has extra instruments. It does not stint an orchestral color. It also contains some really lovely melodies. I mean, Moszkowski, for those of you who know who he was at all, was a virtuoso pianist whose piano career was interrupted by ill health. So he basically became a teacher and a composer. And, his dates were, let's see, what were his dates? Moszkowski was, they have it here somewhere. 1854 to 1925-ish. That was basically his deal. And he died of stomach cancer in poverty in the U.S. He had a very sad life, actually. But because his virtuoso piano career was interrupted, he became a composer, and he wrote a good pile of orchestral music. Some people might know, for example, the suite, in Foreign Lands, which is also going to get recorded, I assume, which has been done a couple of times. His orchestral music isn't completely unheard of, but it's always interesting to see what happens when a composer who specializes in writing rather short, virtuoso piano character pieces tries to do something in larger forms. And I have to be very, very honest and say that as a symphony, this is only partially successful. It's interesting, but it's only partially successful. Why? Well, the program itself kind of tells us. You've got about an hour's worth of music. The first movement is 23 minutes long. 23 minutes long. And let's see what it says it's about here, because we have in the booklet the programmatic titles. The first movement here is about Joan's pastoral beginnings. Now, Joan's pastoral life. Her exalted mission is revealed to her in a vision. That's the first movement. 23 pastoral minutes. That's pushing it. It really is. And the theme that represents Joan, which I can't play for you here. I don't have permission yet to use samples, but I'm working on it. But the theme that represents Joan is a very sort of wimpy, effeminate, little pastoral shepherd girl kind of thing. And there's only so many times you can listen to that. There are, in all of these movements, exquisitely beautiful moments. There really are. I mean, there's solo violin and harp. There's just wonderful tunes that show that Moszkowski was a composer to be reckoned with. But in creating larger forms and putting those tunes into a larger context, not so much, perhaps. I'm particularly talking about not just this long first movement, but the second movement. Oh, the second movement. The second movement is Innere Zerwürfnisse. Well, if your Zerwürfnisse are exceptionally Zerwürf, then we have a problem. Innere Zerwürfnisse means inner conflicts, basically, inner torment, turbulence. So who cares? and then we get, and as in addition to her Zerwürfnisse being very Zerwürf, this movement, the second movement, represents backward recollections of the past. Well, we've just spent 23 minutes listening to the past, right? So what is there to recollect? It's not really helpful in furthering the cause of the program. But things warm up considerably in the third movement. The third movement is the procession of victors to the coronation at Rheims. Joan doesn't really have much to do with this at all. It's just a really cool march movement. It's exciting, it's well written, it's very tuneful, very, very enjoyable, and shorter than any of the other movements. And the finale, well, the finale takes us back to the programmatic aspect of the work, which is that Joan is stuck in a jail. Remember what happens to Joan. Let's spend a moment and figure this out. In Schiller's play, Joan is she's running around with her sword, whacking the crap out of people, and she runs into a knight who takes off his visor, and she looks at him, and she immediately falls in love, and she spares him, and because that, she's betrayed the French, and she's tried as a witch, then she runs away, then the English catch her, and they throw her in jail. It's a whole thing, right? Of course, one of the problems with this symphony maybe is that love interest is gone. In the operatic versions, that's all they're about, is the love interest, because you got to have a tenor and you've got to have a love interest. You don't have to in a programmatic symphony. So that aspect of the whole story is left out. It would have made, I think, a love scene would have made a rather nicer second movement than the Zerwürfnisses, whatever they are. You know what I mean? Or Innere Zerwürfnisse. I would much rather have a love scene or something like that. But of course, the odd thing about Joan and the love scene is that, remember, she spent most of her military career with people thinking she was a man. So if she falls in love with this guy because he takes his visor off, one can only imagine what she must have looked like. I mean, that's all I can say. I mean, it always sort of puzzled me that there could be a love interest at all. So maybe the symphony is closer to the reality of the situation than any of the operatic settings. Anyway, in the last movement now, she's in jail. And there's a wonderful opening. It's very gloomy and dark with muted soft percussion, maybe a little tam-tam in there. It's kind of hard to tell, but I think so. And then there's this fabulous fife and drum music, indicating a battle. It's a real, honest to goodness, terrific fife and drum thing, which is quite startling. Then there's battle music. Well, Moszkowski was not a specialist at battle music. If you want to hear battle music, it's like, Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet. That's battle music, right? It all just goes nuts. This doesn't go nuts. It really doesn't. The battle music is rather tame. Joan somehow mysteriously escapes from jail because the French are being defeated by the English, and she appears at the head of the French army and leads the French on to victory. And then the concluding scene is Tod und Verklärung. Yes. Now, where have we heard that before? It's Joan's death and transfiguration. And that is perhaps the weakest part of the whole piece because, death, well, that's easy to do, right? But the transfiguration part? No. I'm not buying it. A very long concluding chorale under a snare drum roll does not transfiguration signify. It just doesn't. And so I find the conclusion rather unsatisfactory. But with all of that said, this is a real find, this piece. It really is. Because if you like, that whole tradition, that it's part of a series. I mean, I could do a separate talk on sort of mid-19th century program symphonies, for movements that have a narrative theme or that tell a story. They're an interesting bunch. They are wildly inconsistent in quality. And they run the gamut, of course, from advanced German music to Russian music to other kinds of styles. But the ones in that faux Mendelssohn Leipzig style are probably the worst. That's Reinberger, to a certain extent Raff, but he's better. His Fifth Symphony may be his best work. So they vary. And this one is sort of in the middle of that because it's not an inhibited work in any way. It's a colorful work. It has some wonderful tunes. It is formally dysfunctional. This performance features Ian Hobson and the Symphony of Varsovia, who've done wonderful, wonderful work on Toccata Classics. They really have. And I think that one question I have about the performance that I just can't answer is I was taking a look at IMSLP, which has only a piano score of this piece. There is no full orchestral score. And they put the timing down at about 45 minutes. This takes 59. Now, I think that IMSLP is wrong. There's no reason to think that 45 minutes is correct. But I do wonder what would have happened if those Verwürfnisses and the pastoral thing in the first half could have been sped up a bit. I mean, one of the problems the symphony has in terms of pacing is that it contains no quick music until the finale, really until the last 15 minutes. Otherwise, it's all kind of dreamy and relaxed. And even the March of the Victors to the coronation at Rheims Cathedral, which is a wonderful piece of music by itself, isn't quick. And so that need for energy and athleticism and vigor, it just ain't here. And that may be the biggest problem with the work. Leave aside, whether a sonata form is in sonata form or whether the forms are effective. If they're fast, then you're kind of in business. I mean, think of Rimsky-Korsakov's Antar. It has 4 movements and it ends with a slow movement. But along the way, you've got some really good, quick music to get your pulse going, to carry you over into the slower bits. This symphony doesn't really have that. And that, I think, is its greatest defect. But with all that said, I'm extremely happy to have encountered this piece. I think Moszkowski is going to be an orchestral composer worth listening to. I mean, I knew the Foreign Lands Suite, for example, which is lovely. There's good music there, and he was at his best, I think, writing shorter character pieces. And I'm looking forward to hearing some of those. Volume 2 is out, and I'm waiting to talk about that to see if I can get permission to play you some excerpts when I do the talk. That would be more fun, I think. But like I said, with this, I don't think the excerpts are all that helpful anyway. And the interest in the music and in the work and in this release, I think, is self-evident. So if you're curious about this period, if you like sort of this romantic, programmatic music, the Liszt tone poems, that sort of thing, then I think you're going to want to hear this. I mean, how many Joan of Arc symphonies are there, after all? I mean, you've got to give Moszkowski credit in 1877 for being ambitious. It actually sounds like a work that could have been composed considerably later. It's not regressive. It's just not all that thrilling taken as a pile. But you recognize the achievement and the ambition is there. And this was a lot of fun. So you might want to consider it. It's a very good reason to keep on listening. So thank you very much, folks. I look forward to talking about more of Moszkowski's extremely intriguing orchestral output. I'm very grateful to Toccata Classics for putting together this initial release. I mean, it's an ambitious and very worthwhile endeavor, and it deserves your support. So take care. Bye-bye.